Pacific Rim is a franchise about people punching giant monsters with giant robots, and yet somehow it has managed to build an oddly coherent timeline of those punches across 2 films, multiple comics, and an anime spin-off. Every major battle in the saga lines up on a clear chronological progression, from the day the first kaiju walked out of San Francisco Bay and changed the world forever, through the long Jaeger War that followed, to the corporate sabotage of the next generation, ending at the base of an active volcano with a robot the size of a skyscraper detonating its core to save the planet. Here are the 9 most significant kaiju engagements in Pacific Rim history. Battle of San Francisco, August 10th, 2013. K-Day, the day humanity first learned the word kaiju. A 240-foot tall creature designated trespasser climbed out of the Pacific Ocean, walked across the seabed under the Golden Gate Bridge, and began destroying San Francisco. Nobody had a name for it yet. Nobody had a plan for it. Nobody had any idea what was about to follow. The tactical deployment was the entire United States Pacific Fleet, augmented by Air Force squadrons, Army artillery, and the Marines stationed within deployment range. There were no Jaegers. The Jaeger program had not been conceived yet. Humanity threw the conventional military arsenal at Trespasser. Tanks, missiles, fighter jets, naval bombardment for 6 straight days while the kaiju leveled cities along the California coast. Oakland fell. Sacramento was evacuated. The death toll climbed past 10,000 and kept rising. The brutal combat choreography was one-sided in the worst direction. Trespasser took conventional weapons hits and kept walking. Tank rounds bounced off its armored hide. Air-to-surface missiles damaged it cosmetically. The military spent 6 days learning that the kaiju operated on a scale conventional warfare was simply not designed for, while the creature reduced major American coastal infrastructure to debris. The war impact was the foundation of everything that followed. Trespasser was finally killed by 3 tactical nuclear strikes, which left a glassed crater across the San Francisco metropolitan area and irradiated the surviving coastline. The total death toll reached approximately 110,000. The world realized simultaneously that the kaiju threat was both extinction level and recurring, because the breach at the bottom of the Pacific was still active, and another one was coming. The Jaeger program was greenlit within months. The Pan-Pacific Defense Corps was formed within a year. Trespasser's 6-day rampage was the event that defined the next decade of human strategy. KSE M21 engagement. The KSI M21 engagement is the early war research tire event that established humanity's first real understanding of kaiju biology. The moment the Kaiju Science Division, the KSI wing of the Pan-Pacific Defense Corps, learned that the creatures could be studied, dissected, and reverse engineered. It is one of the most pivotal non-Jaeger engagements in the saga. The tactical deployment was unusual because the personnel involved were not pilots. KSI's facilities were operating a containment study around the partially preserved corpse of a Category 1 kaiju designated M21, and the engagement that gave the event its name was a defense action when the body's preserved tissues turned out to retain post-mortem activity. K-Science staff, the on-base security detail, and a small Jaeger detachment had to respond to an active threat from a creature that should have been dead. The drift synchronization stakes were lower. The Jaeger present was operating in standby, but the human stakes were enormous because if the engagement failed, humanity lost its only intact research specimen. The brutal combat choreography was close quarters and frantic. The reanimating M21 tissues, a result of the parasitic organisms living within kaiju bodies, required a coordinated kill order that preserved enough of the specimen for ongoing research. KSI staff like Dr. Newton Geisler and Dr. Herman Gottlieb worked directly with the security team to identify which structures could be destroyed without compromising the dissection program, while the parasitic remnant tried to consume any organic matter within reach. The war impact was the establishment of the entire kaiju research program. M21's tissue samples produced the kaiju blue toxicity data, the genetic linkage research that proved the kaiju were a single connected hive species, and the early studies that would eventually allow Newt's drift experiment with a kaiju brain in the second act of the original Pacific Rim. The Jaegers won the war on the battlefield. KSI won the war on the chalkboard. M21 was where that second war began. Battle of Anchorage, February 2020. 2 brothers piloting a Mark III Jaeger versus a Category Category 3 Kaiju off the coast of Alaska, in conditions cold enough to freeze the seawater on the hull. The Battle of Anchorage is the engagement that sets up the entire main plot of Pacific Rim, and it is also one of the most brutal Jaeger losses ever depicted on screen. The tactical deployment was Gypsy Danger, Mark III, piloted by Yancey and Raleigh Beckett, two of the most synchronized drift partners in the Jaeger program, sent to intercept the Category 3 Kaiju Knifehead as it approached the Alaskan coastline. The deployment was supposed to be routine. Yancey and Raleigh had killed Kaiju before. Their drift synchronization was rock solid. Anchorage was a population center the Jaeger program could not allow to fall, and Gypsy Danger was the closest asset in the region. The brutal combat choreography went catastrophic in the second act. Knifehead, true to its name, had a hardened skull blade that turned out to be substantially more dangerous than the initial threat assessment suggested. The fight was conducted partially submerged in a violent winter storm. Knifehead breached Gypsy Danger's chest cavity, exposed the con pod, and tore Yancey out of the Jaeger mid-drift, a death Raleigh experienced through the neural handshake in real time, with the dying brain of his brother bleeding directly into his own consciousness. The war impact was the establishment of Pacific Rim's central tragedy. Raleigh somehow piloted Gypsy Danger to shore, alone on a single hemisphere of the drift, a thing the engineers had said was impossible, and killed Knifehead in the surf. He then walked away from the Jaeger program for 5 years. The Battle of Anchorage proved that pilots could survive losing their drift partner, but it also proved that survival came at a permanent cost. Every Beckett Brothers scene in the rest of the franchise carries the weight of this fight. Mutavor Strike on Sydney, mid-2025. The first time the world's most expensive anti-kaiju defense system, the Wall of Life, got tested in a real engagement, and the first time it failed publicly enough to discredit the entire concept. The Mutavor Strike on Sydney is the engagement that proved you could not defeat a Category 4 kaiju with concrete. The tactical deployment was supposed to be the Wall of Life, the massive coastal barrier the Pan-Pacific Defense Corps had been pouring concrete into for years as the Jaeger program was politically defunded. Mutavor, a Category 4 kaiju with reinforced ramming horns and unusual lateral mobility, broke through the wall in under 60 seconds, demonstrating in real time that the entire defense strategy was structurally inadequate. Striker Eureka, piloted by the father-son drift pair of Herc and Chuck Hansen, was the responding Jaeger. The brutal combat choreography was the Hansens at their best. Striker Eureka was the fastest, most heavily armed Mark V Jaeger in service, equipped with the sting blades, the missile racks, and a combat style built around aggression and speed rather than the brawler approach favored by older Jaegers. Chuck and Herc dropped Mutavor in 5 minutes of urban combat through downtown Sydney before the kaiju could reach the densely populated city center. The fight was a clean win, broadcast live to a global audience that had been told the Jaegers were obsolete. The war impact was political. The Mutavor engagement proved, in a way no diplomacy could, that the Wall of Life strategy was a fiction, and the Jaegers were still essential. Marshal Stacker Pentecost used the global publicity from the Sydney win to consolidate the remaining Shatter Domes, recall mothballed Jaegers, and prepare for what would become Operation Pitfall. The Mutavor Strike is the engagement that saved the Jaeger program from political extinction in its final hour. Battle of Hong Kong. The Battle of Hong Kong is the central set piece of Pacific Rim and one of the most ambitious kaiju engagements ever filmed. It is the first double event in recorded history. Two Category 4 kaiju, designated Otachi and Leatherback, breaching simultaneously and converging on a single major population center. The tactical deployment was every functioning Jaeger the Pan-Pacific Defense Corps had left. Crimson Typhoon, the Mark IV triplet-piloted Chinese Jaeger operated by the Wei-Tang brothers. Cherno Alpha, the Mark I Russian tank Jaeger crewed by Sasha and Alexis Kaidanovsky. Striker Eureka, the Mark V Australian unit with the Hansens. And Gypsy Danger, the rebuilt Mark III, with Raleigh Beckett back in the con pod and Mako Mori in her first live deployment as his new drift partner. Hong Kong's Shatter Dome was the last fully operational base in the Pacific. The defense was total, the brutal combat choreography was a disaster, and then a triumph in that order. Leatherback hit the line with a previously unrecorded biological EMP burst that disabled every Jaeger in range, except Gypsy Danger, which ran on an analog nuclear core rather than digital digital electronics, and which kept functioning while the rest of the line went dark. Crimson Typhoon was torn apart by Otachi's prehensile tail. Cherno Alpha was dragged underwater and crushed. Striker Eureka was offline for the worst portion of the fight. Gypsy Danger fought both kaiju essentially alone, killing Leatherback with a heavy equipment improvisation involving a cargo ship as a melee weapon, then engaging Otachi in low atmosphere as the kaiju revealed previously unknown flight capability. The war impact was the proof of concept for Operation Pitfall. Gypsy Danger killed Otachi with its plasma cannons mid-flight, returned to the city, and absorbed the loss of 2 crews while securing the lone surviving Shatter Dome. Mako Mori's drift compatibility with Raleigh was confirmed. The Pan-Pacific Defense Corps had 4 pilots, 2 Jaegers, and 1 operational base left. The next mission would be the last one either way. Assault on the Breach, Operation Pitfall, the final mission of the original Pacific Rim, 2 Jaegers descending to the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, carrying a nuclear payload with the goal of forcing the warhead through the dimensional breach itself and sealing it from the other side. The Assault on the Breach is the engagement that ended the original Kaiju War. At the cost of nearly everyone involved, the tactical deployment was Striker Eureka, with Chuck Hansen and Marshall Stacker Pentecost in the con pod after Herc Hansen was injured, and Gypsy Danger, piloted by Raleigh Beckett and Mako Mori. The 2 Jaegers descended into the Mariana Trench under heavy escort with the nuclear device strapped to Striker Eureka. The plan was for Striker to deliver the payload while Gypsy provided cover against whatever the breach sent up to stop them. The brutal combat choreography was layered. The breach defense response was 3 kaiju, Scunner and Raiju at Category 4, with Slattern as the first recorded Category 5, the largest creature in kaiju science records. Striker Eureka took critical damage early in the fight, and Chuck Hansen made the call to manually detonate the payload at depth, killing himself, Pentecost, Scunner, and Raiju in a controlled nuclear release. The breach itself, however, only opened for entities of confirmed kaiju genetic signature, meaning Gypsy Danger could not deliver a follow-up warhead through it without one of the corpses to piggyback on. The war impact was Raleigh's final solo action. Gypsy Danger dragged Slattern's corpse into the breach itself, with Mako ejected to the surface in the escape pod, and Raleigh manually overloaded the Jaeger's nuclear core inside the dimensional rift. The resulting detonation sealed the breach permanently. Raleigh ejected at the last second and was recovered alongside Mako. The Kaiju War was, for the first time since K-Day, over. The world had 10 years of peace before the next disaster found it. Incursion at the Tokyo Shatter Dome. The 10-year peace ended at the Tokyo Shatter Dome. The incursion is the opening crisis of Pacific Rim, Uprising, and the moment the franchise quietly revealed that the next war would not be fought against creatures from another dimension. It would be fought against humanity's own Jaeger program, weaponized from inside. The tactical deployment was supposed to be ceremonial. The Pan-Pacific Defense Corps Council was assembled at the Tokyo Shatter Dome for a vote on the proposed deployment of remote-piloted drone Jaegers, a controversial proposal from the Shao Industries Corporation that would replace human pilots with neural handshake-free remote operators. The drift synchronization status was 0 because nobody expected combat. The environmental stakes were the council members themselves. The most senior leadership of the PPDC gathered in one easily targeted location. The brutal combat choreography was Obsidian Fury, a previously unknown Mark VI Jaeger of mysterious origin, crashing the council and attempting to assassinate the entire PPDC leadership. The fight inside the Shatterdome was close quarters in a confined space, with Obsidian Fury demonstrating combat capabilities and weapon systems that should not have been possible for a Jaeger. Gypsy Avenger, the franchise's new lead Jaeger piloted by Jake Pentecost and Nate Lambert, intercepted the rogue unit in a running engagement that destroyed several square miles of urban infrastructure before the rogue unit was finally brought down. The war impact was the revelation. Obsidian Fury was eventually destroyed, and the autopsy revealed something the PPDC had hoped never to find again: a kaiju brain wired into the Jaeger's control systems, organically piloting the machine. Someone had spliced kaiju biology with human technology, creating the first hybrid weapon, and the Tokyo incursion was their opening shot. The next war was already underway, and the enemy this time was inside the wall. Battle of Siberia. The Battle of Siberia is the mid-uprising engagement that exposed the full scope of the Shao Industries conspiracy and revealed exactly how the drone Jaeger program was going to end humanity if it was not stopped immediately. It is the engagement where the Jaeger pilot stopped being a security force and started being a resistance. The tactical deployment was Gypsy Avenger and the cadet-piloted Bracer Phoenix, sent to investigate a suspected hybrid facility in in the Siberian wastelands. The drift synchronization was strained. Jake Pentecost and Nate Lambert had been increasingly at odds. The cadets were new to live combat, and the political situation back at the Shatterdomes was deteriorating as the PPDC was forced to publicly endorse the drone deployment plan. The environmental stakes were the discovery itself. If the facility contained what the team suspected, the existence of the war would change overnight. The brutal combat choreography was a layered ambush. The Siberian facility was operated by Shao Industries personnel guarding a working kaiju brain and tissue manufacturing operation, with hybrid Jaeger units staged for deployment. The Jaegers fought through the facility's defenses and the hybrid units, with Gypsy Avenger and Bracer Phoenix taking heavy damage as they uncovered the production line. The kaiju biology was being deliberately farmed for use in the next generation drone fleet, weaponizing the same tissue that had killed millions of humans during the original war. The war impact was confirmation of the worst case scenario. The drone Jaegers were not just a corporate replacement for human pilots. They were going to be remotely activated as kaiju hybrid units the moment they were globally deployed, opening the door to a coordinated attack across every Shatterdome simultaneously. The Battle of Siberia gave the Jaeger pilots the evidence to refuse the drone deployment, but it also gave the enemy the timeline to accelerate. The endgame had to come before the drones went live. Battle of Mount Fuji. The Battle of Mount Fuji is the climactic engagement of Pacific Rim, Uprising, and one of the largest scale kaiju fights in the franchise's history. It is the moment the saga collapses every loose plot thread, every rogue kaiju brain, and every drone Jaeger into a single fight at the base of an active volcano, with the fate of the entire Pacific Rim hanging on the outcome. The tactical deployment was every Jaeger humanity still had access to. Gypsy Avenger with Jake Pentecost, Bracer Phoenix with the Cadet Squadron, Saber Athena, Guardian Bravo, and the surviving Mark 6 units pulled from every Shatterdome in operational range. The drift synchronization was operating at maximum across multiple crews, with veteran pilots and cadets fighting together in coordinated formation for the first time in franchise history. The environmental stakes were Mount Fuji itself. The active volcano, the hybrid Mega Kaiju, was attempting to detonate in order to reactivate the original breach and reopen the dimensional war from K-Day. The brutal combat choreography was the franchise at its largest scale. The Mega Kaiju, a fused organism assembled from 3 Category 4 Kaiju genetic templates spliced into a single body, combined the strongest abilities of multiple prior Kaiju into one creature. It had Otachi's flight capability, it had Slatern's tail weapons, it had armored plating and biological EMP bursts, and the durability of a Category 5. The Jaegers attacked in formation, lost units, regrouped, and ultimately had to perform a coordinated thruster boost into low orbit to deliver Gypsy Avenger as a kinetic weapon, slamming the Jaeger into the Mega Kaiju from atmospheric re-entry with its plasma core detonated on impact. The war impact was the franchise's reset. The Mega Kaiju was destroyed, the drone program was disbanded, the breach was prevented from reopening, Jake Pentecost survived, the cadets graduated to full pilot status, and the Pan-Pacific Defense Corps emerged from the conflict with a new generation of pilots ready for whatever the next war would look like. The Battle of Mount Fuji closed the original Kaiju saga not with the slow tragedy of the first war's ending, but with a coordinated team victory. The first time the franchise let the heroes win without paying for it in funerals. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.